Hi everyone, today let's talk about the US debt downgrade, and then we'll go over AMD earnings, as well as the economic data. Then we'll get into the charts, as well as my results for the day and my thoughts going into tomorrow's session. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day that the markets are open, as well as Sundays, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. So US debt got downgraded from AAA down to AA+. This is big, it's happened before, and it definitely was not good for the markets, and they are moving down now after hours. They cite repeated debt standoffs and the erosion of confidence in fiscal management, which makes sense. The government continues to spend wildly out of control. We're at record highs for debt to GDP ratio, and we've talked about that multiple times on the channel, and honestly, I think this is probably warranted. This also means that the government might have to pay a little bit more for its debt, which hopefully should encourage us to be a little bit more fiscally responsible. It's hard to say if that'll actually happen, but it is important to know that this did happen. They also highlight that the current deficit is expected to rise to 6.3% of the GDP, which is obviously a lot, up from 3.7% in 2022. So we're continuing to spend super aggressively despite being at all-time highs for debt to GDP ratio. Moving over to AMD earnings, their revenue fell quite a bit, but the stock did rally on earnings. It was not as weak of a quarter as expected. They've been forecasting weakness in the PC market, and they did get that, but they did beat on earnings also, and they put out good guidance for Q3 and Q4 of this year. They said for Q3, they expect $5.7 billion in sales, and analysts were looking for $5.18 billion. And they also said that they expect the data center sales to grow as well, and that they're expecting a larger ramp in the second half of the year. So again, good guidance for the second half, beat on the top and bottom line, and everything is still good here for AMD. Moving over to the economic calendar, you can see ISM across the board being very bad, much lower than expectations, much lower than the 50 mark, indicating a contraction. We also saw the JOLTS report coming in worse than expectations, and the market was actually fairly tame on that, and then it started to fall on the US debt downgrade. Moving over to tomorrow, we have ADP non-farms in the morning. Forecast is 188,000. Previous read was about 500,000, and I would expect this to be more in line with the forecast this time. We'll see how that plays out. Overall, not super eventful for tomorrow. Moving over to earnings for today, lots of beats on the top and bottom line. You can see AMD doing well. Caterpillar also beating. Everything looks pretty good here. Not a lot of misses, and not from companies that you really recognize, except for BP. They did fairly poorly on the top and bottom line. Otherwise, everything else was pretty good. Looking at tomorrow, we have Qualcomm, CVS, Shopify, PayPal, Ferrari. Not a ton of big companies, but Qualcomm, fairly interesting. Moving over to Max Payne, you can see lots of puts still in the market, continuing to prop the market up. We do have a little bit more of a divide here now between 455 and 460, and it does seem like we're going to stay fairly tight in that range. We're basically at that price now, so we'll see how that plays out. Does mean that we could see a dip into this range and then a rally into the end of the week, but that debt downgrade could absolutely push us lower, changing this landscape going into tomorrow's session. Otherwise, very little change here on Max Payne. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the S&Ps here on the hour and the daily. You can see the hour selling off in the after hours on that announcement, hitting the 200 SMA on the hourly chart, bouncing a little bit from that area. You can see we had consolidated and coiled up a little bit here, and then that break after hours. Definitely going to be trading off of that 200 SMA here on the hourly chart. 454.28 is that level. We've been in this range for a while, and I continue to trade off of these two levels here, but the 200 SMA on the hourly is important as well. And you can see that here on the daily chart, that gap down into that candle basically went sideways on the day, and then current prices are all the way down here at the 9-day moving average at 454.80. Moving over to the NASDAQ, you can see we were sideways yesterday, stepped down in the pre-market, rallied up to the trend, couldn't get above previous highs, And now after hours, obviously we're seeing that rejection based on the downgrade. If we didn't get that downgrade, I think we would be holding somewhere in this range where we pretty much closed right around 382.50 or so. But now with that downgrade, you can see we wicked the 200 just like the SPY, selling off a little bit more now. Some of these things you just can't predict, and the market looks like it's going to be going lower tomorrow. Moving over to the 4-hour, you can see that structure. We now have a high, lower high setup, something we haven't seen on the NASDAQ for a while. And honestly, you got to be pretty bearish on this going into tomorrow's session. Moving over to the Russell, we absolutely rejected from that level here, 198.75, back into the middle of the range, holding on the 21 EMA on the 4-hour chart. Did sell off a little bit after hours, just like everything else, but not nearly as bad. The Russell still demonstrating strength relative to the others. Dow also pushed up on the day, hitting resistance once again, pulling back after hours, and I think everything is going to be a little bit accountable to that downgrade. Moving over to equal weighted S&Ps, you can see we are still in this channel. We tested the lower end of that here today. And if we jump down to the 4-hour chart, and you can see that after hours price action here, we hit that level like we saw on the daily chart, and now we're selling off right down to that next level, 153.19, holding right there. If this breaks down tomorrow, that could be an absolutely catastrophic move, potentially pushing down to 151.50 at this previous consolidation just for a moment, but my next major level is down at 149.82. Moving over to Apple and Tesla. Apple moving down, testing that level once again. Momentum still fading. You could argue this is still a higher high versus the previous one, despite these wicks. But again, fading here after hours, still affected by that downgrade. Tesla fell throughout the session, broke that level. EMA is consolidated here, looking down at the 200 on the 4-hour, sitting at 248.17. And if this level breaks here at 255 at these two previous lows, that's what I'm going to be looking for. And then support below that at 232.84. Moving over to staples and discretionary, both of them selling off here today. Discretionary turning to bearish momentum on the 4-hour chart. Staples has been bearish. At this point, you're looking at the 55 EMA down at 75.04 to hold. I do think that that's going to happen, but that does illustrate a little bit more downside to come early in tomorrow's session. I do expect a rotation into safer defensive stocks. I think staples is one of the places people are going to go. Discretionary, I expect this to break that 170.68 level, 144 EMA sitting at 168.72, and then a next horizontal support at 166.78. Moving over to transports on the daily and the weekly just for a moment, I want to show this inside candle developing on the weekly chart. Momentum moving back towards bearish, rejection off of overbought conditions. You can see this massive rally that we had on transports, and it does seem to be fading after touching resistance here, showing more indications of a reversion to the mean, sitting down at 250.85, looking like a 13-point pullback over the next week or two. Moving over to the 50 and 200-day averages, we talked about a little bit of strength yesterday, and then that absolutely got crushed here today. So 200-day average coming down to the 21, looking super weak. I expect this to start to follow through to the downside. You can see that clear break after the retest. 50-day average also breaking down, and you want to see that break 77.46 tomorrow. Momentum and RSI bearish on both of these. Everything looks pretty weak on breadth. Moving over to yields, you can see yields are continuing to look strong. 10-year yield rallying, and then tomorrow looks like it's going to be bullish as well. 2-year showing a little bit of strength, but looks more like a consolidation than the 10-year. 10-year showing clear strength, looking to push up to that 410 level. Moving over to the dollar here on the 4-hour and the daily, everything was looking good. We broke out above the 200. We said if that happened, we were looking up to the 55 EMA. And on that wick, we got very close to it. And then we got the news here on this last candle on the 4-hour. And we sold off super dramatically. Obviously, a downgrade is going to be weak for the dollar. And that could mark a reversal of trend or at least a pullback down to the 55, sitting at 101.36. This will be one to watch. If the dollar and equities are falling at the same time, that could be an indication of lower prices to come. Usually dollar weakness means higher equity prices, but that's not going to be the case based on the debt downgrade in my opinion. Moving over to JNK and TLT, you can see JNK moving lower here today, hitting that 200, hitting that trend line, holding in this zone, still in this upward channel, just testing that lower bound. Doesn't look terrible, but momentum is bearish. RSI below the 50 line doesn't look great either. Really needs to hold here if it's going to hold. TLT, obviously a massive sell-off, took out this previous low, weakness, and that's obviously a clear reaction to the downgrade. Moving over to the volatility indices, big move higher on the announcement on the move index. VIX not showing too much yet, rallied early, broke down in the middle, rallying here after hours. If this takes out the trend and starts to push to 1490, that would be interesting. I'll be watching this early in tomorrow's session, but at this point I'm pretty convinced that we're going to be moving lower over the rest of the week. We'll see how that plays into max pain for the end of the week, but there's clearly a little bit of bullishness going into tomorrow's session on the VIX. Moving over to my accounts, you can see I made a little bit of money. I did sell some puts here in the IWM after we moved lower. Fortunately, I did not roll those up as the IWM moved about $1 lower on that announcement. We'll see how that plays out in tomorrow's session. Still not a bad entry here, and I'm okay with the IWM as long as the structure holds up. Qs, sold some puts for tomorrow, down at 381 and 382. Had a little bit of money on the 382 put, but I think that's going to be gone as the NASDAQ has moved about $1.70 lower on that announcement. We'll see if we get a little bit of a rebound early in the session, but overall I don't expect that to be great. And then I actually ended up selling a 141 put for 85 cents on XOP. I do think oil and gas is going to continue higher. We'll see how that plays out with the debt downgrade, but overall demand I think is going to be strong for oil and gas in the second half of the year. Let me know what you think of the US debt downgrade. Is it going to hold up or are they going to reverse it? The last time that happened, I believe the person who made that decision ended up being fired and the decision was reversed. We'll see how that plays out now. Definitely going to affect markets going forward. Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. And make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.